On my 18th birthday, my father didn't give me a gift, he gave me a red marker. While I was sleeping, he used it to slash my name out of his will, leaving everything to my stepmother. He thought he'd left me with nothing, but he forgot one thing, a secret clause my grandmother hid in the trust. They had exactly 12 hours before I sold the house for cash. Just wait until you hear the sound my stepmother made when the police dragged her onto the sidewalk in her slippers. My name is Clara Vance. On the morning I turned 18, I woke up to a silence so heavy it could only belong to a Saturday in the Colorado foothills. It was 6:31 a.m. The house was a tomb. There were no streamers on the banister, no off-key singing from my sister, Sophie, and no scent of the blueberry pancakes my father used to burn when he still bothered to pretend. There was only the bite of cold oak beneath my bare feet. I walked into the kitchen to find a single note left on the marble island. At the lawyer's office. Back late. Keep the noise down. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie sent an hour earlier. We are taking care of something big. Just stay out of the way today, sis. I didn't hesitate. I went straight to my father's study. There, half hidden under a stack of tax folders, lay a photocopied will. I flipped to the final page. My name, Clara Vance, had been struck through with thick, aggressive strokes of a red marker. Below it, in my father's unmistakable cramped handwriting, was the new decree, everything to be divided equally between Elena Vance and Sophie Vance. My heart didn't race. It didn't even skip a beat. It simply went cold, as if someone had turned a valve and replaced my blood with ice. I brewed a cup of black coffee, opened my laptop, and logged into the private trust portal my grandmother, Beatrice, had established years ago. The screen glowed green. Clara Vance, sole beneficiary and trustee. Authority status, effective immediately. I hit the speed dial for Mr. Arthur Sterling. He answered on the first ring. Happy birthday, Clara, he said, his voice grave. I'm selling the estate, I told him. I want a 12-hour turnaround and a wire transfer. Can you finalize the paperwork? There were 2 beats of silence before he exhaled. Your grandmother wrote that specific clause for this exact moment. I'll pull the files now. I ended the call, took a slow breath, and dialed Julian Thorne. He was an investor, who had been trying to lowball us for this property since I was 16. Still interested in the Magnolia Drive house? I asked when he picked up. Name your price. It's a cash-only, same-day close. To understand why I felt such frozen clarity that morning, you have to look back 17 years. My mother died when I was barely a year old, taken by a cancer that moved faster than the doctors could track. My father carried me through the cemetery in his arms, his tears soaking my baby blanket, as he swore no one would ever replace her. A year later, he brought Elena home. This is your new mother, he told me while I was still finding my balance on toddler legs. Elena was pregnant before the wedding cake had even gone stale. Sophie arrived the week I turned 2, and suddenly, I was the responsible eldest sister while I was still drinking from a plastic cup. Elena's favorite mantra became, big girls let their little sisters go first. So, I went second. Always. Grandmother Beatrice watched it all with narrowed eyes. She saw my father coming to her every few months with a new tragedy, a new excuse for why he needed her money to provide for his daughters. When I was 10, she drove me down to Mr. Sterling's office in the city and spent 3 hours signing an irrevocable family trust. She placed the 5-bedroom house, her entire investment portfolio, and every cent of her savings inside it. Then she added the line that changed my life. On my 18th birthday, I would become the sole trustee with unrestricted power to sell, transfer, or dispose of any asset without anyone's consent. She squeezed my hand that day and whispered, this is your lifeboat, Clara. Don't you dare hesitate to use it. From the age of 14, I worked every job I could find. I babysat for neighbors on summer nights and mowed lawns in the suffocating July heat until my palms were raw with blisters. I shoveled driveways at 5 in the morning when the wind chill was well below zero. I tutored younger kids for cash and survived on black coffee. At 16, I started working closing shifts at a local cafe. Every dollar I earned went into the trust. I let them think I was helping out, because my father and Elena needed a heated pool, a home gym with floor-to-ceiling mirrors, and a brand new European SUV for Elena. They needed private trainers for Sophie and prep courses for a college she never intended to attend. When Sophie decided she wanted a studio apartment downtown to find herself, I paid the deposit. I paid because I thought if I gave enough, they would finally see me. They never did. Sophie got luxury trips and birthday parties with hired entertainment. I got a store-bought cake and a forced smile for the photos Sophie posted with captions about her perfect family. Grandmother Beatrice began to lose her memory when I was 15. The last time she truly recognized me, she gripped my wrist with a strength that startled me. "They'll try to take what's yours," she warned. "Don't let them." She passed away 3 years ago. I promised her then that I wouldn't. Every double shift and every missed dance was me quietly loading a weapon they didn't even know I held. They assumed the trust was just a pile of boring legal papers that would stay locked until they were ready to cash in. They were wrong. The moment the clock struck midnight, the lock turned. I sat in the kitchen, the coffee cold in my hand, as I took photos of the amended will. Those red slashes across my name felt like a final goodbye. I sent the images to Mr. Sterling. "They just erased me," I texted. His call came seconds later. "Clara, Section 7B is airtight. As of 12:01 a.m., you have the legal right to move the property. No notice, no signatures, no court. It's yours to give away if you choose." I logged back into the portal. The balance was $4,310,000. The appraised value of the house sat at $1,350,000. I asked him to send the full documents immediately. While the files downloaded, I scrolled through 5 years of banking history. Every withdrawal my father and Elena told me was for the good of the family. $160,000 for the pool and the gym. $70,000 for Elena's car. Over $100,000 for Sophie's various whims, and an apartment she abandoned after 4 months. I screenshot every line, every cent they had bled from my grandmother's legacy, and tucked it into a folder titled Evidence. The printer in the study groaned to life. I watched 48 pages slide out, still warm to the touch. I stapled them together, slid them into a heavy envelope, and wrote my name across the front in bold, black ink. I called Julian Thorne back. $1,280,000, I said. Wire transfer. Closed by sunset. I'm in the city right now, he replied after a short pause. I can be there in half an hour. My title company can move mountains for a deal like this. We'll make it happen. I gave him the lawyer's information and hung up. My next call was to a local locksmith. I booked the earliest slot. Then I reserved a small moving van. I wasn't touching their furniture. I didn't want their cars or their memories. I only wanted what was mine. I went upstairs, pulled 2 suitcases from my closet, and started packing. First went the only photo album I had of my mother. Then Beatrice's letters. I packed my college acceptance hoodie, the one I'd bought with my own savings, and a worn teddy bear from a childhood fair. Everything else could be left behind. I carried the cases to the garage and checked the portal one last time. Julian had already initiated the earnest money deposit. $100,000, non-refundable, hit the account within the hour. Mr. Sterling sent a confirmation text. Title is clear. You are the seller and the trustee. It's done. I took a final walk through the house. I walked past the kitchen, where Lena had spent years criticizing my presence. I passed the living room, where Sophie had ruined the upholstery, and let me take the blame. I looked out at the pool I had cleaned every weekend while they relaxed. I left it all exactly as it was. The air outside smelled of pine and fresh starts. The house wasn't theirs anymore. It never really had been. I sent the photos of the slashed-out will to Arthur Sterling. They just erased me, I wrote. My phone rang before the screen could even time out. His voice was steady, a low anchor in the morning chill. Clara, Section 7B is airtight. Your grandmother planned for this. As of midnight, the property is yours to command. No notice, no court, just your signature. I pulled up the trust portal on my laptop. The balance stood at $4 million, while the house was appraised at another $1.5 million. I spent the next hour scrolling through 5 years of my family's greed. I saw every transfer I'd been pressured to sign, every withdrawal Elena and my father claimed was for the family's survival. $168,000 for the heated pool and mirrored gym. $74,000 for Elena's SUV. Over $100,000 wired for Sophie's various retreats and the downtown loft she abandoned after 4 months. I screenshot every line, archiving the digital trail in 3 different accounts. The printer in the study groaned as 48 pages of evidence slid out, warm to the touch. I stapled the stack, slid it into a heavy envelope, and wrote my name across the front in bold, black ink. I called Julian Thorne next. He picked up on the second ring. Clara Vance. I've been expecting this call. $1,280,000, I said. Cash wire. Close today. There was a brief silence. I'm in the city right now. I can be at the house in 25 minutes. The title company owes me a favor. We'll make it happen. I gave him the lawyer's direct line and hung up. My next calls were clinical, a locksmith for a same-day smart lock installation, and a small moving crew. I wasn't touching their furniture, their cars, or their curated memories. I only wanted what actually belonged to me. I went upstairs to my room and pulled 2 suitcases from the top shelf. I started with the only photo album where my mother still existed. Then came grandmother Beatrice's handwritten letters, the ones she sent every birthday after her diagnosis. I folded my grey university hoodie, the one I'd bought with my own wages, and tucked it on top along with my laptop and the worn teddy bear Beatrice had won for me at the state fair when I was 7. Everything else could burn. I carried the cases to the garage and checked the portal one last time. I initiated the wire instructions for Julian's deposit. $100,000 in non-refundable earnest money hit the account within the hour. Arthur sent a confirmation text, title company confirmed. Clean cash deal. You're the seller and the trustee. It's done. I exhaled, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. I walked through the rooms one last time, the kitchen where Lena criticized my existence, the living room where Sophie's carelessness was always my financial burden, the pool I spent every weekend maintaining while they lounged with friends. I took nothing. I left everything exactly as they deserved to find it. My phone buzzed. Julian was wiring the funds. I slipped the envelope of trust documents into my bag, grabbed my keys, and stepped onto the porch. The mountain air was sharp and smelled of pine. The house wasn't theirs anymore. It never really was. I sat on the edge of my bed for a moment, waiting. The silence was perfect. My phone lit up with digital signatures, purchase agreements, trustee affidavits, disclosures. I signed every page with a calm, rhythmic stroke. By 11:07, the earnest money was locked into my account. The final closing was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. In this state, the law moved fast for a trustee with a cash buyer. No mortgage, no appraisal, no waiting. Just finality. I met the locksmith at the door. He recognized me from the last time Sophie had lost her keys. I need every exterior lock swapped for smart tech today, I told him. I'm the trustee. I'll forward the documents. He quoted the price and got to work. The moving crew arrived shortly after. 2 men, 1 truck, and less than an hour of labor. I pointed to the suitcases and a few boxes of books. I wasn't touching the designer sectional, or the massive TV they all fought over. I opened my closet and dragged out the last of my things. I tucked the photo of my mother, the one where she's holding me in the hospital bed, into the side pocket of my bag. Then the showbox of Beatrice's letters, each one ending with the same promise, "You are enough." I added my yearbooks and my old MacBook. I zipped the cases and lined them up by the garage door like soldiers ready to retreat from a war zone. I walked to the entryway and unscrewed the wooden plaque that read the Vances, estimated 2009, the year my father married Elena. I dropped it into a trash bin without ceremony. The title company emailed the confirmation, property under contract. I printed 2 copies and taped them to the glass of the front door. There would be no professional sign in the yard, no courtesy call to the neighbors. Just the facts. The locksmith handed me the old keys in a plastic bag. Trash or keepsake? He asked. I dropped them into the kitchen bin. The movers were gone in 43 minutes. I did one final walkthrough. Elena's perfume still lingered in the master suite. Sophie's old trophies were gathering dust in her room. I stood in the 2-story foyer, my backpack on my shoulder. Sunlight poured through the high windows, landing on the spot where our family photos used to hang. I felt nothing, not anger, not even sadness. Just the sharp, clean edge of the end. I set the alarm to away and stepped outside. The new lock clicked shut with a satisfying, heavy thud. The house was sealed. Just as I reached the driveway, the familiar hum of the European SUV signaled their arrival. The engine cut off with its usual smug purr. 3 doors opened, and 3 sets of footsteps crossed the concrete I had power-washed every spring. Sophie was the first to see the notice taped to the door. She froze, her designer bag swinging at her side. "Mom? Dad? What is this?" Elena's heels clicked faster as she approached. My father was already at the door, his fist raised as if he still held the keys to the world. He pounded on the wood, the sound rattling the sidelights. "Clara! Open this door right now." Elena's voice cracked behind him. "Sweetie, please. This isn't a funny joke." I tapped the app on my phone. The deadbolt slid back with a soft, mechanical thunk. I stood in the foyer, waiting. Arthur Sterling stood to my left, his leather briefcase at his feet. Julian Thorne leaned casually against the kitchen island, his arms folded. The title officer's face was already visible on the large screen in the living room, the digital closing room waiting. My father stormed in, his face the color of a bruised plum. He opened his mouth to shout, but the words died when he saw the 2 strangers and the absolute void where my life had been. Sophie shoved past him, her eyes darting to the empty console table. "Who are these people? Where is all your stuff?" Elena clutched at her throat. "Clara, honey. Whatever this is, we can talk about it." "This isn't a discussion," I said. My father finally found his breath. "You changed the locks on your own family." Before I could answer, the alarm let out 2 sharp, high-pitched chirps. I had set it to duress mode at noon. Any forced entry or unauthorized presence would trigger an immediate dispatch. Within minutes, the rhythmic pulse of emergency lights began to wash over the foyer walls. The teddy bear's left ear was half chewed, a souvenir from the golden retriever we had kept for exactly 6 weeks before Elena decided that pets were too much work for her curated life. I zipped the cases, hauled them downstairs, and lined them up by the garage door like soldiers ready to retreat from a lost territory. I walked to the front entryway and unscrewed the wooden plaque that read the Vances, estimated 2009, the year my father married Elena. I dropped it into a discarded cardboard box without a second thought. The title company emailed a PDF, property under contract, pending closing. I printed 2 copies on my father's printer and taped one to the front door and the other to the side light window. There would be no sprawling for sale sign in the yard, no courtesy call to the neighbors. Just the cold, hard facts. The locksmith arrived first, 29 minutes door-to-door. He scanned the trust summary I'd sent, nodded once, and set to work. Front door, back door, garage, and patio, all were fitted with new smart locks keyed exclusively to my phone. He handed me the old brass keys in a plastic bag. "Trash or keepsake?" he asked. I dropped them straight into the kitchen bin. The movers showed up right after, 2 men in charcoal shirts. I pointed to the suitcases and a few boxes filled with my textbooks and winter coats. 43 minutes later, the truck was loaded and gone, the invoice paid directly from the trust's debit card. I did one final walk-through. In the master bedroom, Elena's heavy perfume still haunted the air. In Sophie's room, old cheerleading trophies gathered dust on the shelves. I walked past the basement gym and the mirrors I'd paid for, and out toward the pool. The water was a piercing, crystal blue. I was the only one who had ever skimmed it, usually on Sunday mornings while they slept in. I stood in the 2-story foyer, my backpack on my shoulder and the envelope of original trust documents in my hand. Sunlight poured through the transom window, landing on the exact spot where our family Christmas photos used to be staged. I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, just the sharp, clean edge of finality. I set the alarm to away, stepped out, and pulled the door shut. The new lock clicked with a satisfying, heavy thud. The house was sealed. Just then, the white European SUV turned into the driveway, the engine cutting off with that familiar, smug purr. 3 doors opened. 3 sets of footsteps crossed the stamped concrete I had power-washed every spring. Sophie saw the red and black notice taped to the glass first. She froze mid-step, her designer bag swinging. "Mom? Dad? What is that?" Elena's heels clicked faster as she approached. My father was already at the door, his fist raised as if he still held the keys to the kingdom. He pounded hard enough to rattle the glass. "Clara. Open this door right now." Elena's voice cracked behind him. "Sweetie, please. This isn't a funny joke." I tapped the app on my phone. The deadbolt slid back with a soft mechanical thunk. I stood in the foyer. Arthur Sterling waited to my left in a tailored navy suit, his leather briefcase at his feet. Julian Thorne leaned casually against the kitchen island, his arms folded across a black polo. On the mounted television, a digital closing room was already open and waiting. My father stormed in first, his face the color of a bruised plum. He opened his mouth to roar, but the words died the moment he registered the 2 strangers and the absolute absence of my belongings. Sophie shoved past him. "Who the hell are you people?" Her gaze darted to the bare console table, then to the empty hooks by the door. "Where is all your stuff?" Elena clutched at her throat, her eyes wide. "Clara. Honey, whatever this is, we can talk." "It's not a discussion," I said. My father finally found his voice low and dangerous. You changed the locks on your own family. Before I could answer, the alarm let out two sharp, high-pitched chirps. I had switched it to duress mode at noon. Any unauthorized entry or refusal to leave would trigger a priority dispatch. Less than 6 minutes later, the pulse of red and blue lights began to paint the foyer walls. Two local officers stepped inside. The taller officer scanned the room. We have a priority alarm activation. Everyone stay calm and identify yourselves. My father exploded. This is my house. My daughter locked us out and brought strangers inside. Arrest her. The shorter officer held up a hand. Sir, lower your voice. He turned to me, ID and paperwork, please. I handed over my driver's license and the stapled 48-page trust. Arthur Sterling stepped forward, sliding a certified deed addendum across the marble island. Arthur Sterling, counsel for the trustee. The property transferred to Miss Vance's sole control at 12:01 a.m. today. She is the legal owner of record. The officers took their time. The taller one read the critical paragraph aloud. Upon the beneficiary reaching age 18, said beneficiary shall become sole trustee with full, unrestricted power to sell, convey, or otherwise dispose of trust assets without the consent of any other party. My father's jaw worked soundlessly. Elena let out a high-pitched, broken sound and swayed where she stood. That's a lie. Sophie screamed, her voice cracking. We were at the lawyer's office this morning. He told us the house belongs to us. Arthur Sterling adjusted his glasses with clinical precision. Your lawyer can amend a will until the ink runs dry, but a will only governs assets held in a person's name. This property was transferred to the Beatrice Vance Irrevocable Trust years ago. Your will is legally irrelevant. Elena collapsed against my father's chest, gasping for air as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. We are being robbed, she wheezed. In our own home. Sophie tried to bolt toward me, her face contorted with a frantic, ugly energy. You planned this, didn't you? You're just a jealous, spiteful. The shorter officer moved effortlessly between us, a solid wall of blue. Back up, young lady. My father's eyes filled with tears he hadn't earned. Clara, sweetheart, whatever they told you, it's a misunderstanding. We love you. I looked at him and felt nothing but a hollow, arctic silence. You love the idea of my money, I said. Not me. The taller officer closed the binder and handed it back to Arthur. The title and trust appear valid. Miss Vance is the sole legal occupant. You three need to leave the property immediately. Elena let out a raw, animal sound. Sophie dropped to her knees right there in the foyer, her palms slapping the hardwood. This is my house. She shrieked. I grew up here. My father tried one last, desperate reach. Officers, please. She's 18 today. She's upset. Give us a chance to talk this through as a family. The officer shook his head. Not on this property, sir. You have 15 minutes to collect personal belongings. After that, anyone remaining will be removed and cited for trespassing. Sophie was openly sobbing now, crawling toward the staircase like a child half her age. Elena had to be half carried by my father toward the master bedroom. I heard the sounds of drawers slamming and zippers tearing, the frantic, rhythmic wails of a life being dismantled, echoing down the hallway. I stayed exactly where I was, my arms loose at my sides, watching the digital clock on the cable box tick. 4:59, 5:05, 5:12. They came back down carrying 3 overnight bags and 2 designer purses, their faces pale and streaked with salt. My father paused at the threshold, his shoulders shaking. Elena refused to look at me. Sophie's eyes were bright with pure, unadulterated hate. The officers escorted them to the porch. Through the sidelight, I watched my father fumble with his key fob, dropping it onto the concrete before picking it up with trembling fingers. Elena folded herself into the passenger seat like a broken doll. Sophie climbed into the back and immediately turned her face toward the window. The SUV reversed down the driveway, its tires crunching over the same gravel where I had once scraped my knees learning to ride a bike. I didn't move until the taillights vanished into the pines. The digital closing room on the living room screen flashed, the officer's face appearing crisp and professional. "We are ready to record whenever the seller is." Julian Thorne sat across from me at the oak dining table, the one that used to seat 7 of us for holiday dinners. Arthur placed the closing binder between us like a referee. I opened my laptop, angled the camera for the official record, and hit the prompt. The title officer walked us through the final settlement. Purchase price, $1,280,000. Earnest money credited. Balance due, $1,180,000. Julian tapped a few commands into his phone. A notification pinged on the trust account. Wire received. 4:47 p.m. I signed the warranty deed with the same black pen I'd used for my university application. Trustee signature, seller signature, both were mine. 11 minutes from start to finish. The title officer smiled. "Congratulations, Mr. Thorne. Recording is confirmed. The keys are yours." Julian stood, stretched, and shook Arthur's hand. "Pleasure doing business." He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I'll have my crew here Monday to start the renovations. Take your time leaving today." He walked out the front door without another word. The officers stepped back inside, their presence a quiet reminder that the clock was still ticking. Elena's knees buckled. She grabbed the door frame to stay upright, her nails scraping against the white paint. My father's face had gone a sickly grey, the colour of old dishwater. Sophie spun in a slow, dazed circle, taking in the empty shelves and the silence where her life used to echo. "Clara," my father said, his voice a ghost of itself. "You can't do this to us." I met his stare. 12 hours ago, you stood in a lawyer's office and erased me. I am only doing what my grandmother made legal the second I turned 18. Elena let out a broken sound, half sob and half scream. "You ungrateful little." She lunged again, but my father caught her by the wrist. Sophie dropped to the floor, her palms flat against the wood she used to practice her dance routines on. "This is my home," she whispered. "Where am I supposed to go?" I didn't answer. My father tried again, his voice softer, pleading. "We can fix this. We'll rip up the new will. You'll still get your share. Just don't take the house." I almost laughed. "You think this is about my share? You think I want a piece of what you were willing to steal?" Elena slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her mascara smeared into jagged black streaks. "I'll kill myself," she said suddenly, her voice hollow and terrifyingly flat. "If you do this, I swear I'll do it." The taller officer shifted his weight. That's not going to help anyone right now." My father knelt beside her, whispering promises I couldn't hear. Sophie crawled over and curled against Elena's side. I stayed standing, watching the minutes bleed away. They eventually moved like ghosts, grabbing a few more changes of clothes stuffed into duffels that suddenly looked ridiculous. My father tried one last time, holding out his phone. "Call the title company. Tell them it was a mistake. We'll pay you whatever you want." I looked at the screen, then at him. "I don't want your money. I want what was always mine." The officers cleared their throats. "Time's up." My father helped Elena to her feet. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Sophie refused to look at me as they shuffled toward the door. At the threshold, my father paused, his shoulders sagging. "I'm sorry," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I didn't reply. They stepped onto the porch, the officers following and pulling the door shut behind them. Through the glass, I watched my father toss the bags into the back of the SUV, then stand there for a moment, staring at the house as if he didn't recognize it. The engine turned over. The reverse lights glowed. I watched until the SUV disappeared around the corner. Then, I walked back to the empty dining table and sat down. The house was finally, completely quiet. "I'll kill myself," Elena said suddenly, her voice hollow and terrifyingly flat. "If you do this, I swear I'll do it." The taller officer shifted his weight, his expression unreadable. That kind of talk isn't going to help anyone right now." My father knelt beside her, whispering desperate promises I couldn't hear. Sophie crawled over and curled against Elena's side like a child half her age. I stayed standing. I watched the minutes bleed away, cold and immovable. They moved like ghosts after that, grabbing laptops and charging cables. A few changes of clothes were stuffed into designer duffels that suddenly looked absurdly out of place. My father tried one last time, holding out his phone with a shaking hand. "Call the title company, Clara. Tell them it was a mistake. We'll pay you whatever you want." I looked at the screen, then at him. "I don't want your money. I want what was always mine." The officers cleared their throats. "Time's up." My father helped Elena to her feet. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Sophie refused to look at me as they shuffled toward the door. At the threshold, my father paused, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of the house was finally crushing him. "I'm sorry," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. I didn't reply. They stepped onto the porch. The officers followed, pulling the door shut with a final, echoing click. Through the sidelight, I watched my father toss the bags into the back of the SUV. He stood there for a long moment with his hand on the liftgate, staring at the house, as if he didn't recognize the world he was standing in. Elena collapsed into the passenger seat. Sophie climbed into the back, her face turned away. The engine turned over. The reverse lights glowed white against the darkening drive. The tires crunched over the same gravel I had raked every spring since I was 12. I watched until the tail lights vanished around the bend. Then, I locked the door, set the alarm to stay, and walked back to the empty dining table. The house was finally, completely quiet. 8 months later, my silver Honda, paid for in full by the trust, rolled past the old neighborhood. I hadn't planned the route. I was just taking the long way back from the aerospace lab on campus, the one that always smells like jet fuel and expensive ambition. The cul-de-sac looked smaller than I remembered. The maple trees had grown, but everything else felt shrunken, diminished. Julian had painted the house a sophisticated charcoal gray with stark white trim. A sleek black Range Rover sat in the driveway, where the Lexus used to be. The basketball hoop Sophie had begged for years ago was gone. In its place stood a minimalist metal sculpture that likely cost more than her first car. I slowed to 20 miles an hour without meaning to. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat, one of thousands of unread messages from numbers I'd blocked the day I left. Sophie had been creating new accounts on every platform, sliding into my notifications with variations of "You ruined my life" and "Dad's drinking again." I never opened them. I just kept hitting block. I lived in a one-bedroom off Canyon Boulevard now, 3rd floor, west-facing windows that caught the sunset over the peaks. The rent was steep, but I'd paid the entire lease up front. The trust allowed me to distribute funds for education and health without penalty, and I hadn't hesitated. The aerospace program at the university was brutal, but I'd paid 4 years of tuition in full the week I moved in. The rest covered my books, my food, and the quiet certainty that no one could ever take my future away again. My father and Elena had ended up in a cramped 2-bedroom near the reservoir, on the side of town where the buildings all looked like weathered concrete. With the house gone and no equity left to refinance, their credit had cratered. I knew because the trust still received the annual tax statements. My father's credit score had dropped below 600. Sophie had quit her community college courses after 1 semester. Now, she waitressed full-time at a franchise bar on the Strip, black polo, forced smiles, and tips that barely covered her share of the utilities. She tried to Venmo request me 37 times before I blocked that, too. The only person I still talked to from my old life was Maya, my lab partner from high school. She knew everything, and she never judged. We met every Thursday at a local diner for burgers and root beer, and she never once asked why I didn't go home for the holidays. I turned onto the main road, passing the grocery store where I used to push the cart, while Elena filled it with organic luxuries I was paying for. The coffee shop on the corner still had the same green awning. I wondered if the manager ever noticed I was gone. My phone lit up again. An unknown number. Please, Clara. I'm pregnant. I need help. Sophie. I pulled into an empty church parking lot at the end of the block, my hands tight on the wheel. The message sat there on the screen. No photo, no proof, just words. I stared at it until the display timed out and went dark. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread, blocked the number, and drove the rest of the way to campus with the windows down and the music loud enough to drown out the ghosts. Some doors stay closed for a reason. My 19th birthday fell on a Saturday. I threw open the windows of my apartment, letting the crisp May air roll in, and invited exactly 4 people over. Maya, plus 3 friends from my propulsion systems cohort. No giant sheet cake, no forced singing, no fake smiles. Just 3 extra-large pizzas, a case of soda, and music loud enough to rattle the blinds. We pushed the coffee table back, and turned the living room into a disaster of red cups and discarded crusts. Maya and I ended up on the tiny balcony, our legs dangling over the railing as we watched the college crowd stream toward the bars below. She bumped her shoulder against mine. Happy actual birthday, Vance. I smiled, the real kind, the kind that reached my eyes. Thanks for coming, Maya. Inside, one of the guys was attempting to balance a pizza box on his head while the others cheered. Laughter spilled out the open door and floated down toward the street. Later, when the boxes were stacked in the trash and the last guest had hugged me goodbye, I stood alone on the balcony. The sky over the mountains was the color of a bruised peach, the street lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere miles south, the house on Magnolia Drive belonged to strangers who would never know the screams that had echoed in those halls, or the red pen marks across a little girl's name. I still carried the Vance name on my ID, but the paperwork to change it was already sitting in a folder at the courthouse. My mother's maiden name. Clara Sterling. The petition was set for a hearing next week. One more tether quietly cut. Maya poked her head out. You okay? Never better, I said, and I meant it. She handed me a single cupcake with 1 lit candle. Make a wish anyway. I closed my eyes. I didn't wish for money, or revenge, or even justice. I wished for the version of me who used to flinch at loud voices to stay gone forever. I blew out the flame in one breath. We stayed up for hours talking about grad school and NASA internships. Normal 19-year-old things. When Maya finally crashed on my couch, I pulled a blanket over her and stood in the dark kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. This was peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of choice. I opened my laptop and refreshed the trust portal one last time before bed. The balance was healthy, even after the tuition and the car. I closed the tab. I didn't need to check it every night anymore. My phone stayed silent. I had changed my number the week I moved in. The only people who had it were the four in my living room and Mr. Sterling. I walked to the window. A couple stumbled arm in arm down the sidewalk, laughing the way only people with nothing to lose can laugh. I watched them disappear under the bridge and felt something loosen in my chest. Family isn't blood. It's the people who stay when you stop paying for their lives. It's the friends who show up with cheap pizza and expensive loyalty. It's the grandmother who built an iron wall around your future when everyone else was busy picking the lock. I turned off the light and crawled into bed. Tomorrow would be Sunday. I had a fluids exam on Monday, a wind tunnel lab on Tuesday, and absolutely no one waiting to take credit for my success. For the first time in my life, the day was entirely mine. Maya, Leo, Sarah, and Noah from my propulsion systems cohort were there. There was no tiered cake, no forced choruses of song, and no practiced, hollow smiles. We had 3 oversized pizzas from the shop down the street, a case of soda, and music loud enough to make the cheap blinds rattle against the window frames. We pushed the coffee table against the wall, turning the small living room into a makeshift dance floor littered with red cups and discarded crusts. Leo was attempting a clumsy, outdated dance move while Sarah recorded it for future leverage. Maya and I ended up on the narrow balcony, our legs dangling over the railing as we watched the late-night crowd drift toward the sweet shop across the street. She bumped her shoulder against mine. "Happy actual birthday, Clara." I smiled, the kind of smile that finally felt genuine, reaching my eyes for the first time in years. "Thanks for coming, Maya." Inside, Noah was trying to balance an empty pizza box on his head while the others counted the seconds. Their laughter spilled out the open door and drifted into the cool mountain air. Later, after the boxes were in the bin and the last guest had hugged me goodbye, I stood alone on that same balcony. The sky over the foothills was the color of a bruised peach, the street lights flickering to life one by one. Somewhere 60 miles away, the house on Magnolia Drive belonged to strangers who would never know the ghosts that had once lived within those walls. They would never know the tears that had soaked into the carpets, or the red pen marks that had tried to erase a little girl's existence. I still had Vance on my driver's license and my university ID, but the paperwork was already winding its way through the county courthouse. Beaumont. My mother's maiden name. Grandmother Beatrice had kept it after my grandfather passed. The judge had approved the petition only last week. My new social security card was already in the mail, one more tether quietly severed. Maya poked her head out from the kitchen. "You okay out here?" "Never better," I said, and I meant it. She handed me a single white cupcake with a lone, flickering candle. "Make a wish anyway." I closed my eyes. I didn't wish for wealth, or revenge, or even a sense of justice. I simply wished for the version of me who used to flinch at loud voices to stay buried forever. I blew out the flame in a single breath. We stayed up for hours after that, talking about graduate school, aerospace internships, and recent engineering scandals. Just normal 19-year-old things. When Maya finally fell asleep on my couch, I draped a throw blanket over her, killed the lights, and stood in the dark kitchen. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator and the faint, muffled bass from the bar patios 2 blocks over. This was peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of choice. I opened my laptop and refreshed the trust portal one last time before bed. The balance sat at nearly $4 million after the tuition, the apartment, and the car. I closed the tab. I realized I didn't need to check it every night anymore. My phone remained silent. There were no frantic texts, no new numbers begging for a piece of my life. I had changed my number the week I'd signed the lease. The only people who had it were the 4 friends in my living room and Mr. Sterling, who still sent the quarterly statements like clockwork. I walked back to the window. A couple stumbled arm in arm down the sidewalk, their laughter loud and careless. I watched them disappear under the stone bridge, and felt a weight finally loosen in my chest. Family isn't blood. It's the people who stay when you stop paying for their lives. It's the friends who show up with cheap pizza and expensive loyalty. It's the grandmother who built a fortress around your future while everyone else was busy trying to find the key. I turned off the balcony light, locked the door, and crawled into bed. The last thing I saw before I drifted off was the faint glow of the campus clock tower against the sky, its golden light shining like a promise I had already begun to keep. Tomorrow would be Sunday. I had a fluids exam on Monday, a wind tunnel lab on Tuesday, and absolutely no one waiting to take credit for my success. For the first time in my life, the day was entirely mine.